we're building community, and that's the main focus here. That we're using money, and our goal is to keep the money flowing locally,
Yes.
so that we are more prosperous as a community, instead of having to have our investors send their money out into the global financial markets for who knows what.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Shanaea Donaldson. I'm in Washington at Port Townsend at a lovely establishment called the Mount Townsend Creamery. And I'm here to talk to you about local investing with these guests. James Fraser, who's a financial advisor and a co-founder of Lion, which is Local Investing Opportunities Network, and with Case Cole, who is an investor of this and other enterprises. And Matthew Day is the co-owner of the Mount Townsend Creamery. Thank you for joining me, everybody.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having us.
So I want to know from you, James, tell me about how Lion got started, the idea behind it. Tell us what that is.
Well, there's a long tradition of local investing in our county and in our town. And we're kind of like a isolated rural area, not necessarily a place where Wall Street comes to visit. So we learned pretty early on self-sufficiency in terms of funding and other areas of life. So it was just a natural, and always has been a natural, for us to support each other financially in creating our enterprises and our value. So there was kind of like an unorganized, or loose, I would say, network of people that have been doing this. Case has been part of that for many, many years. And a couple of years ago, there was a need to organize and formalize. They grew out of a local sustainability movement called Local 2020.
Okay, all right. Go ahead. So what did you do to organize what was sort of maybe ad hoc before that? What happened?
Well, under James's leadership, because he knows a lot about securities laws and things of that sort, we formed a network of potential local investors and lenders who share with each other opportunities for investing. And James can talk a little bit further about the mechanism, the way we do that.
Okay, sure.
Well, it's basically at the core just an email list. It's the simplest thing.
Whoa.
We have virtually no budget. It's completely grassroots, and we have a few basic forms that people fill out to, one, join as a member and a potential investor. Two, for business people to submit investing opportunities, which then we just email out to all of our members for them to consider, and then potentially talk further with the local business owners.
So let me see if I understand this right. Basically, you've just sort of formalized the network of just communications. You're not doing like a bank would to say, this is a good investor or this is a good investment. You're just facilitating making the links.
Connections.
We do not give advice. It's merely a clearinghouse of ideas and opportunities.
So then it's left to you as an investor or you as a business person to sort of present, you as a business owner, right? Well, okay, tell us, what did you have? I'm going to jump ahead because I know that there's lots of details and so on, but
Sure.
as a business owner, how did you even know about this?
Well, we went through initially mostly through personal relationships before Lion was formed, and then most recently we refinanced some loans through the Lion Forum. And what we did was put together an overview of our business, what we were looking to do, what the refinance was about, and what we were looking to achieve through that. business case, if you will, and went and presented that to the group. And from there, it sort of segued into several conversations with interested investors and one-on-one discussions with them about their concerns, their more information they needed to know, and from there a negotiation as to what they were interested in, how they were interested in participating.
Okay, so your initial forms came through Lion. Do you have like some? Okay, I'm probably way ahead of things, but you have some forms that the business owner needs to address so that you, an investor, gets most of your questions answered. Or tell me how it was for you.
Yes, well, typically when a business is looking for investors, they already have a business plan that has been reviewed by some local experts on how to set up businesses, by a local accountant. And so they develop a prospectus, which includes the financial projections and all. And then as a local investor, I look at that and I say, well, I know the people who are setting up this business, I know the accountant, I know the people who are involved, and I trust them and I have faith in their expertise, and this looks like a good opportunity. And then it's entirely up to me as an individual to make that decision whether or not this is the right investment for me.
Right.
And so sometimes things come to the Lion members and I say, I'm not particularly interested in that kind of investment for any one of a dozen reasons. And there are other things that come and I say, wow, that really speaks to me. I want to be involved. And the creamery was one of them. I mean, I love cheese and I knew the people who were setting it up, and I said, whoa.
Great investment.
I like that.
I want cheese. And I might add, it's a perfect example of where not only do you know the people, but you also get this fresh produce, because the investors in the creamery get their dividends in cheese. And so I get, a certain number of pounds of cheese per year as my payment or my dividend.
Your dividend.
And
wow.
And it's wonderful.
That's a real. I haven't thought that's a fabulous advantage for investing locally.
And I can give you a couple other examples. I'm also involved with one bicycle repair and rebuild shop and another high-end bicycle shop. And again, free care for my bicycles. I'm also involved with, and when I say I mean my wife and I, we also support a local organic farm just outside of town called Finn River Farm. And they are an absolutely fabulous farm that has you-pick blueberries and apple orchards and all kinds of produce, and now have a cidery. And so again, part of my dividend is I get all the free blueberries that I can possibly eat. So it's just a wonderful win-win all around.
I think what's lovely about this story is the reminder is that money is just one of the forms of exchange. And as the economy tightens, as it is doing, companies like yours that have real products, real tangible products, it's an advantage to you to have. We can do exchanges in cheese and blueberries and other things. I'm going to go back to you for a second, because I have a feeling we may have skipped over some of the operational, logistical, practical things. What have we missed here if somebody wanted to follow your footsteps?
Well, one of the key things to be aware of is that there's securities laws that cover investments, and that happens at the federal level. It also happens in each state. Each state has its own unique laws and regulations. So generally what we do is we use what is called a non-public exemption. So the key is that all of our transactions are private. And what that means to us is that we need to have pre-existing relationships between the business owner and the potential investors. And in a small community like ours, they're usually already in place. And when they're not, when we get like a new member, we have a orientation. We have occasional social events. We have quarterly meetings. So a key component of Lion is getting together and actually creating community on a one-to-one basis between the investors and the business owners and just the community at large, so they know what our mission is and what we're doing.
So your orientation, let me make sure I understand, is for investors and potential investors, partly to know one another and what Lion is about. Is that what happens?
Right, so they can have the relationships that allow us to do what we're doing without having to create really onerous, long securities registration statements and audits and it gets really
and all
crazy.
The trappings. Yeah.
And I might say it's open to anyone, but you have to be sponsored by someone who's already a member. Again, it forces that personal connection,
I see.
which is part of the requirement, is that we know the people who are in this quote investment network. And anyone can go to the website, the local 2020 website. It's l2020.org, and they can look under economic localization and click on that, and it describes Lion, and it's got all the forms right there. If you want to join the network, or if you want to put a proposal and have it sent to the network.
And if you're in a faraway community, to download those as models, maybe get guidelines from you. If you haven't got them there, they'll want them soon.
Yep.
For how you set this up and how you organize, your community. Because some communities, I can imagine, may want to adopt that and not have the closeness of the small community that you are here in Port Townsend. But what I hear is that having you've got relationships of trust that you are building here. Because it may be that you already had a relationship with Matt and the creamery, but some new investor who's moved to town doesn't yet, but that's your neighbor next door has just moved to town, and that, it's like you're having to build that trust on what exists and what's yet to come. Other practical logistics, go ahead.
Well, we're building community, and that's the main focus here. That we're using money, and our goal is to keep the money flowing locally, so that we are more prosperous as a community, instead of having to have our investors send their money out into the global financial markets for who knows what.
I remember you have Michael Schumann's book there, The Small
Yes.
Mart Revolution.
Yes.
And when we spoke to Michael, he pointed out that for most retirees, for example, that the largest bulk of their money, the IRA money, is going back into Wall Street instead of being local. And you are working to keep it local. Can that work with IRA money? Which has special conditions around it?
Yes, you have to do what's called a self-directed IRA.
Okay.
And it's there's special custodians that can set it up. It tends to be a little bit more expensive than your normal IRA, but it's possible, and you can do all sorts of things with the self-directed IRA. So usually it makes sense for slightly larger investments, but that IRA money is definitely usable for local investments.
That's good to know. What kind of, I'm just curious, how many kinds of investment situations have you facilitated, has Lion facilitated, and in what time period?
Well, Lion's been around for a couple of years since we formally organized, and in that time we've gotten many, I would say maybe 25 or so investing opportunities. Maybe half of them have been funded. So some just kind of come and go. No one has interest, and that's just a natural kind of thing. And of the ones that have been funded, I think that there's been probably about $500,000 invested locally through Lion. Before Lion came along, we have records of about another 1.1 million that people had already invested. So the local investing amount, I think, that we know of is up around 1.5 million. And a lot of that has already been paid back with interest and is then recycled back into more local businesses.
That's a lot of cheese. No.
Right.
So you're keeping that money circulating, which is of course what you want in your community, because it's going to your local accountants and your local schools and your local dentists and whatever. what kind of challenges, what kind of hurdles will other communities need to know about that you've run into and can help them ease their way?
I think getting the word out is something that's key. Having a core group of organizers that are willing to, basically volunteer their time and effort to organizing and getting the word out.
And if I could add, having somebody who's willing to take the leadership of that network, somebody who's got some expertise and interest in this, and because James also serves as sort of the screener. So if someone sends in an application, James will look through it briefly and see, has this been taken to the level of quality and detail that is worth sending to the group? So he handles that sort of first screening, not about is this a good idea or a bad idea, but is there enough information here for the potential investors to be making a knowledgeable decision about it.
The key is that I'm not providing any kind of advice. I'm not screening ideas for good or bad. And so, sometimes, honestly, some less than quality investment opportunities come through, and it's really up to our investors to make their own decision on that. So that's why we recommend that people that aren't comfortable making their own investment decisions, work with other local investors to kind of talk and, discuss, the merits or lack of merits of various investments, and also to use their own professional advisors. Talk to your accountants about it. Talk to your lawyer, if needed, because when these deals get done, ultimately, there's a legal document that should be behind it. Whether it's a really simple promissory note form that you can easily download off the internet, or if it's more complicated because you're buying a share of the business, it's really a good idea to have the right kind of people looking over the process, tax or legal or whatnot, just to make sure that it's done correctly and that there's no fallout from the process. But a lot of times we find that the amounts are relatively small.
Like what? Can you give me an example of the average amounts of loans?
Well, the smallest we've seen go through is 10,000.
Okay.
Maybe we would see 5,000. But I'd say the average amount is maybe more like 30 or 40,000. I've seen them get much bigger into the low hundreds of thousands.
And what kind of interest rate is the range at this point?
Well, there's been anywhere from 0
Okay.
to, maybe
8.5%.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
with most of them being between, say, 5 and 8. It's a rate that's better for the investor who's getting really low single digits, and it's also better for business owners that are would be paying over 10% with a bank.
Commercial.
I was going to ask that since if I understood you right, you were refinancing some of your other loans. Certainly, tell us.
Yeah, and that would have been, from our perspective, refinancing that through a bank would have been a lot more involved of a process, but also from a loan perspective or an interest rate perspective, we're looking at something that's probably closer to 10, 11, maybe 12%. So we're well below that, and that helps our business survive in a way that we might not be able to afford loans at those rates. So
when you set out your application, you had a certain amount of money you probably had in mind that you hoped to attract investors for. Is that
Yes.
that's so?
Yeah.
And purpose is did you have changes in your business plan of what you wanted to do, or is it just to hang in here on a tough economy and just have your indebtedness reduced?
When we initially started about 5 years ago, we raised about 65% of the funds that we needed to start the business outside of our own personal funds, and that was split roughly in half between equity investment and a loan. And the agreement we had with that initial lender was a term of 3 years. So after that expired, we weren't prepared to pay the note off in full, and we needed to basically refinance that amount with other local investors. And so we were able to do that, as well as raise a little bit more money for some infrastructure investments that we wanted to make here at the Creamery.
That sounds fabulous.
And I might add that there's a great working relationship between the local business and the investors, because Matt and I talked and we said, look, as an initial investor in the Creamery, it's in my best interest that the business succeed. And so I worked with Matt to pull together the investor group and a few new people who were part of Lion, and worked with Matt to sort of sell some more shares and to set up this loan opportunity, so that it wasn't all on Matt, because I want Matt to be making cheese, and I want my investment to be good. So there's this, again, this win-win.
This mutual support that everybody is winning out of this.
It's really fantastic to have in local. One of the huge benefits to a business in terms of having local investors is having that kind of support from people like Case, who are amazing proponents of local investing and investing and also promoting the community that goes with that in terms of building relationships between the investments, the companies that he works with. So that's having that kind of level of support within the community is really important for local businesses.
And you asked, what are some of the hurdles or the potential problems?
Sure.
Well, as Joe Dominguez and Vicki Robin say in their book, Your Money or Your Life, we in America are more reluctant or are more nervous about sharing money information with each other than we are about talking about sex. And, that's such a private thing. And if you have a small community and you are lending to people it changes that whole dynamic over money. It's sort of like, well, he knows that I'm lending money, and or I know that his business is having financial problems, or, these kinds of things which we're typically very nervous about. It becomes more of a community shared knowledge, and you sort of begin to loosen up a little bit about the money issue. And I might add that in the roughly 20 investments that I've been involved in since I've been here in Port Townsend,
Yes, sir.
I have written off one for $300, and that's all I've lost. And now some of the investments, it's been delayed in paying back. And so again, it's that sort of, some have come and said, oh gee, can I really borrow that money another year, even though that wasn't the original deal? So that initially brings up this little bit of discomfort because we're friends. But in the long run, you get used to that. You say, hey, that's just part of life, and sometimes things go better and go worse, and so it's okay.
Yeah, and when you talk about accountability, at that level, it's a whole nother level of responsibility towards the people who have helped you. And we see Case all the time, as well as other people who have invested. And so there's, you can't really hide what you're doing as a business. You don't want to, and that's a level of commitment that I think kind of elevates the
you don't want to let them down.
No.
In about our last 4 minutes here, I'm going to ask Case to pop the cork on the Finn River cider.
Okay.
Well, I want to make sure, are there other details, advice you'd give to other communities? What haven't I remembered to ask? Sort of the elements that others want to walk in your footsteps need to know.
Right. I'm currently working on a project to expand our Lion website so that we have a bit of a toolkit for other communities to take what we've done and adapt it to what their unique circumstances are, because every community is going to be different. Lion might not necessarily work on a whole city scale like we do it. Yeah.
Hey.
Instead, maybe it would work on a neighborhood scale,
Okay.
or just within a group of people that are peers. So we're going to be hopefully getting that going soon.
Good. That will be helpful to others.
That is on our website as well. I'm starting to work with people around the country. There's been interest in creating these groups elsewhere. So some of these groups are coming forward and starting to help as well. There was a website created, I think it's lioninvesting.com.
Okay.
That website is like a forum for Lion groups to speak with each other.
Great.
And we're just starting to build that out. So I think that, you know, having kind of, it might eventually go towards some kind of a national network of groups that are doing this, and we can share ideas and information about how to do it right.
If I understand right, you've not had to create a formal structure for Lion. You're not a,
We're just
you know,
a
you're just a
loose
group of people. It's an
people.
association of people. And secondly, how important do you feel it is? It made me a little nervous when you said that every state has its own different security laws. I'm thinking about what do we do in California. If people in the Lion Investing Network have already worked that out, if there's
Mhm.
one in California, then they'd be who I'd go to, you know, they've done the homework
Yes.
for the rest of us.
Yeah.
Do you feel it's important to have someone who's in the financial world to take the leadership that you mentioned, Case, for that local Lion group?
I would say that it's not necessary to be in the financial world, but certainly somebody that's comfortable with money and investing in general. That really helps. But even if that isn't the case, even if you just have people that are passionate, you know, passion and a desire to learn will go a long way. And, you know, I've made myself available to help support other groups.
Bless you.
And, you know, as they get going too, you know, I expect to be learning from them.
Mhm,
So, you know, we're working on building something that is really scalable.
What you are creating is one of the elements for the new economy that takes us out of the economy that's not working for Main Street, for the local businesses. Important key. All right, and then last word from anyone here. We got about a minute.
Well, I would just add that it as you suggest, it really takes a change in our mindset about money. You know, where do we invest and how do we invest, and do we do it locally or on Wall Street? It just takes a little shift, but it's not that huge a shift. It seems like a big shift, but I guess my message to other people would be, once you get into it, it's wonderful, and it just seems like the right way to go.
And there are opportunities everywhere. You know, every town has them.
Sure. And I could see that I would be looking at what are the businesses I want to make sure are here for the long term, like you've done, you know, those that supply our food and those that supply crucial services and so on. I want to make sure they're here for everybody for the long term. Gentlemen, thank you. This has been fabulous. I am really excited for what you are doing, and I will say to our viewers, let's toast to that. Create your Lion group like these guys have, and keep your community locally reliant, locally resilient. You're watching Peak Moment, and I'm in Port Townsend with James Fraser, Case Call, Matt Day. Join us next time.